Good afternoon. I'm Robin Givhan with the Washington Post. I'm the fashion critic, and thank you for joining me with Washington Post Live. Joining me this afternoon are Lindsay Peoples Wagner, the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, and the creator and creative director and founder of Pyer Moss, Kerby Jean-Raymond. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, Robin.
Hi.
I thought I would start out by just asking you to talk a little bit about your road to fashion, because I think for a lot of people, it can seem like an intimidating place to venture. And I think you both have had interesting routes here. Lindsay, you are the youngest, I think, editor-in-chief at with Condé Nast, and you started out there at Teen Vogue as an intern from Wisconsin.
Yes.
And I remember you said that it was, I think, who suggested that you perhaps pursue an internship at Teen Vogue. Can you just talk about that suggestion and the hurdles that you sort of soared over on your road there?
Yeah, I mean, I always really loved fashion. I really felt that it was something that I adored from watching The Hills, or I spent a lot of summers with my grandmother at a Black senior citizen center where we would make like quilts and rugs and pillows. But it really wasn't until college that I realized that I wanted to give it a real effort and a real try. So one of my former professors, her name's Jamie Claiborne. Jamie, if you're watching, hello. I miss you. She's always been great to me, and she had saw the post on Ed 2010, which I don't think they even do job postings anymore. But and she said, I think you should go and try it. And so I went and just did closet work, which is basically organizing and merchandising of clothes and returning clothes to designers. And I was hooked. So I came back, every summer, every chance I got, I was interning. And yeah, it was my first job out of school as well.
Can I ask you how important it was to have that person who sort of understood, at least to some degree, what it took to enter the industry, to have that person say to you, maybe you should do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's everything because, especially where I'm from, it wasn't necessarily that anyone was telling me that I couldn't do it. I just didn't know it was actually an option, right? And I think that for a lot of Black kids specifically, you don't even know that certain jobs in fashion are a thing. I think you see just designer, but you don't know that you could also be creative director at brands. You don't know that you could also, be consulting for brands. And I think that that exposure, especially as a young Black girl, is everything.
Kerby, you came to fashion from a completely different route. You are a child of immigrants. You are from East Flatbush. And you once had said that when it comes to design, our superpower is our story. So what is your story? What was it about fashion that intrigued you? Because you have tentacles in a lot of creative fields, but fashion is kind of your primary vocabulary.
Right. I mean, for me, like getting into fashion specifically was kind of like it was making a choice between all of those different things that were influencing me and that I was being surrounded by, whether it be music or sports or entertainment and science and politics and all these different things that I could have chose from. I gravitated towards fashion because it was something that was like naturally uh, appealing to me was sneakers, and I always wanted to be a sneaker designer. And I remember going into the High School of Fashion Industries like directory book. I mean, sorry, the New York City High School directory book, and you had like a bunch of different schools, and I landed on the page for the High School of Fashion Industries and saw that they had a shoe design and a jewelry design program, and and I always knew how to draw. So I did the portfolio and painted the still lifes and did everything that was required to get into the school. did technical drawings of shoes and everything. And this was when I was 12 and 13 years old. And when I finally got into the school, um, uh, we had citywide budget cuts for New York City public schools, and they took away the jewelry and shoe design program, and they defaulted me into a fashion design program as like a next best option. And it wasn't something I was fond of in the beginning. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, but it was something that eventually became part of my life because I started to experience it in different ways. I was learning to do it in school, which I hated, and one thing led to another, as far as like my homeroom teacher getting me this opportunity to intern at Camden, New York. And when I was 14 years old, and I started working for K at 14, and at 15 years old, she gave me my first job, my first paying job in the fashion industry, where I was her apprentice. I began as her apprentice, and then soon after that, she was helping Georgina and Karen start Marchesa, and she put me on that project. And I kind of caught the bug from there and developed my own brands. Did a lot of costume design really early on, a lot of like streetwear stuff really early on, and supplemented with my high school education, which was a little bit more formal in learning the technical know-how of how to create clothing and everything like that. Then doing the tech prep program at the FIT helped a lot too. But ultimately, I went to college at Hofstra University, and I really got to learn my business skills. And I always knew that I wanted to have my own brand. And as a teen, I was kind of like a protege in that way, where I was young and I was a novelty item, and able to be the kid that people wanted to work with, because it was cool, because I was like a young kid that could draw, and but when I graduated from college and I was 21, 22 years old, I wasn't that cute kid anymore, and the job opportunities were all gone. So I saw the only way to start to get a foot back into fashion was to have my own business. And at 26, cusp of 26, I started Pyer Moss, and it's been 6.5 years at this point of Pyer Moss, and been a wild adventure.
Well, I was going to say, it feels like both of you, came into this industry and never, at least from the outside, it seems, never faltered in terms of how you wanted to define yourselves in the industry, but also how you wanted to change the industry. And because that leads me to, I think, one of the most revealing stories that's been written about the industry, particularly within people of color, was the story that Lindsay, that you did when you were at New York Magazine at the Cut. And it was essentially you're interviewing something like 100 different Black people within the fashion industry. And I think one of the most moving things was you're talking about how it almost became a bit of a therapy session. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it seemed like in many ways the emotion came out of someone wanting to hear their stories and then wanting to put those stories out there for the world to see in a really major way.
Yeah, I believe there's strength in numbers, and I think that a lot of what I've always tried to do my work is, how do we look at all these things through inclusivity and in a way that hasn't been done before. And I think that people traditionally have always felt like when specifically Black people, want to talk about their experience in the industry, that it's all, complaining, or that it's, a nuanced specific experience. And I really felt like there was something bigger to say of things that people have really gone through that they may not have shared, that they may not have talked about. A lot of people that really had a lot to lose, even being a part of the interview. And I mean, Kerby was a part of it. I think it was really monumental for me to just be able to talk to everyone, new in the industry and veterans in the industry, and hear their perspectives and also get their opinions on a way forward. And I mean, as I look back, it's been almost 2 years, which is crazy, but I think, it's only now kind of become a part 2 of what it's like to be a Black editor-in-chief now in this role. And I think that a lot of it for me has been such a learning lesson, and also provided a bit more of a community between us, of knowing that other people are also struggling with these things, because I think too often, Black people are, told you're going to be blackballed, or you're not going to get hired, or you're not going to get a job if you speak up on these things. And so I felt like it was the best way at that time to definitely talk about all of the issues, for sure.
In the aftermath of that, did you hear from people who felt like they had in fact lost something by participating in those interviews?
No, I think, well, what people were telling me was that I was not going to get a job. People were telling me I would lose any footing in the industry, because I don't think that people love to be on the side of reporting on people's discretions about the industry. So it was more so people were saying like, oh, like after this, like people aren't going to let you report on this kind of thing, or people are going to pigeonhole you to only writing about this certain thing. But yeah, I mean, I think that piece came out on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and that Friday I had email from Anna, so it worked out.
Yeah. So since you bring that up, I'm going to jump right in on that question. The email from Anna from 2 years ago. I'm really curious, not necessarily, well, not wanting or you to reveal like secrets or anything, but if you want to, feel free. That the conversation that you had with her then about what she wanted from an editor of Teen Vogue versus what she has been saying now in the midst of so much upheaval in media. It's happened at the Washington Post, it's happened at the New York Times, and it certainly happened at Condé Nast. So can you talk about then versus now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I remember that weekend very clearly, because I thought the email was spam at first, and then I realized it wasn't. And I had talked to a couple of people who I knew interviewed with her before, and a lot of people were giving me all these tips and, learn all these things about tennis in a weekend. And I just very felt strongly by that Monday that I had to be who I really am, and that I didn't want to pretend to be somebody that I'm not, but I didn't want to assimilate, and I didn't want to make it seem like they were getting something different than really who I am and what I'm passionate about. I'm not concerned with being palatable for white people or any other people. This is what you see is what you get. And so I think that you can see that in all the work that I've done. And I think that you can see that in a lot of the changes that have happened. But yeah, I mean, everybody has work to do. And I've definitely been an advocate for those changes, and going to keep pushing for all of them, because I do think that a lot of things need to change.
Are you feeling hopeful that Condé Nast can change with the same system in place, or do you feel like the system has to be defunded, as one might say?
I mean, I think the whole system of the industry has to change, right? Like, I think Kerby would say the same thing. I think a lot of things that we traditionally have held up high in the industry need to be moved around. How we talk about what is, worthy of being put on a cover, who is chic enough, who we give, platforms and resources to. I think we have to rethink all those things in the industry.
Kerby, one of the things that when I first met you, you were working on a collection in which you were using a film to introduce that collection that really focused on police violence. And
Right.
and it seemed like at the time that it was incredibly well received, and yet there was quite a backlash that occurred. Um, I mean, what happened at that point, and what did you really learn from it?
There's no doubt that it was well received publicly. I think what happened was, I think at the time this was very new, and speaking about Black lives led people to question my motives and led people to label me as a pariah, or like, not of fashion, or that I couldn't be viable commercially. A lot of stores canceled my orders. People publicly praising the work, but privately oppressing the idea. And I think what really showed there is that as I suspected, that the rally cries of Black Lives Matter at the time, and some of them even now, were for show. And people were too scared to say that they hated the idea. And you've seen a lot of it now, where people are kind of like showing up as their authentic selves, and a lot of corporations who are led by these people are showing up in their authentic selves, and they can't help it but be insensitive, and they can't help it but be dismissive of these cries from the people. So, from the fashion industry, like I said, it was publicly, it was lauded, but privately, I was being slowly dismantled from a business standpoint. And it's funny now. It's not. I wouldn't say it's funny, but it's ironic now that, like, we're getting articles, like New York Times published an article last week. A lot of people are kind of going back to that show, like, as if they're just finding it out for the first time. And I don't really know what to make of that yet. But I think our relationship, Robin, has always been tremendous, because you were one of the first to show me respect, and as a Black woman, you understood the importance of what we were doing then. And I thanked you before, but thank you again for being in that video, and allowing us to stage this act of protest, this act of awareness in such a way that was unsuspecting to the fashion industry. So thank you for that.
Well, it's, in full disclosure, it was funny because we hadn't met, and a mutual friend had connected us. And I have to say, I mean, I remember that you came all the way down to Washington to do this interview, which completely bowled me over, because I was like, really? He's coming all the way to Washington to do this? Okay. And when you say, though, that people were afraid, I mean, what were they afraid of, do you think? Acknowledging police violence?
People,
Or, I mean, it's an interesting conundrum, I think, in the industry, because people like to perceive fashion as being incredibly progressive, extremely tolerant, tremendously open-minded. And yet all of those things would lead you to suspect that it would then be the most racially diverse, size diverse, age diverse, the most sort of embracing kind of community. I mean, how do you respond when you see companies now sort of stepping up and saying, rah, rah, we are on the side of racial justice, and yet they don't seem to have looked at their own boardroom?
2015 and Black Lives Matter, and the thoughts and the effects of police brutality and things like that were coming to the public consciousness again. People weren't asked to choose a side and boldly take a stance the way that they had to after 2016 when Trump was elected, because now you had somebody who was public and making these statements and being very divisive and, literally a country divided. And I think, back then with stores and with magazines and with, all of the other establishments within our industry, felt like maybe choosing a side was going to alienate half of their customer because people, it was still a gray area between who was who. And I think what happened is like, in this Trump era, we've seen a lot of people just become a lot more emboldened, outwardly racist versus covertly racist, what we were experiencing before. And we're unearthing things now. We're realizing that we had outward racist among us in the fashion industry, and you're seeing them. You're seeing images now. You're seeing blackface parties and but the type of stuff that we were enduring as young designers and as creatives and editors and stuff like that, a lot of that stuff was covert, and people weren't speaking out about it in droves. So being the first one, or being the one to say like, yo, this is going on, and this is bothering me. It's easy to look crazy, and that's what kind of happened to me. It's like I looked crazy being a whistleblower in these ways. And like I remember I posted a story on Twitter the other day, and how embarrassed I was by my ambition to be in Barney's and to be amongst like my contemporaries of the time, Pyer, Fear of God, Off-White, etc., because of this post that this editor did. And he went to the Barney's 7th floor where they grouped up all of those Black designers in like 4 racks. And that's kind of like the best that we got as Black designers getting the Barney's. And the guy who was an influential editor wrote, excuse me, please point me to the fuckboy section or something like that. And I tweeted it about 2-3 weeks ago, just kind of like illustrate the type of stuff that I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and the type of stuff that I was experiencing, and just even trying to go out to fashion parties and still not being able to get in because I was Black or looked a certain way, and like all these things is like bubbling up, and they're on top of who I already was. I've been protesting since 1999 with Avenue Lima. Like I've been, I started the NAACP chapter at my college. Like I've been this person. So like I was always looking out for it. But when I came into the industry, what I started to realize was a lot of my Black counterparts, whether they had been my publicists at the time or stylists that I was working with, were just taking it, and I wasn't willing to just take it like that. And it took my counterparts some soul searching and some shit to happen. It's for Trump to get elected, for them to even come out and say, yo, this, you know what, he's actually not crazy. And for a while I just looked like I was beating a dead horse and doing this shit for attention because no one else was speaking up for me with me.
So, Lindsay, I'm curious if you have the same sense of timeline. I mean, did 2016 feel like that was a turning point in your mind in terms of what you were willing to speak up for, what you were willing to sort of put, career on the line for, and whether or not you had other people who were willing to go along with you in making a stand?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Trump definitely played a lot of portions in a lot of things, going badly. But I think that a lot of it for me really started from this place of just humbly coming into the industry and really wanting to learn from the best people and really just being hungry and the first one in and the last one out. And I always had to work multiple jobs because I'm not from a wealthy family, so I couldn't afford to just work my $9 an hour job and go home and wear Chanel all day. So it was a lot for me. I felt very alone, and I felt like there weren't a lot of people to really look up to that wanted to give you the blueprint, wanted to help you, and wanted to help you figure it out. And so I honestly just got fed up to a point of wanting to do more work, of really being vocal about a lot of things, because I realized that a lot of the other Black girls that also wanted to work in fashion would start, they would get a job, and then they would, come to me, a month in and be like, hey, like, I don't think I can do this. It's really a lot. There's a ton of microaggressions happening. If I,
Mhm.
don't wear designer stuff every day, I don't think these people will ever pay attention to me. I'm not going to get promoted. I'm broke. Like, and I just think I realized that there wasn't going to be a legacy after me, and I've always really tried to ground myself as being a ladder and helping up those around me and helping another Black person get their foot in the door, get a job. And I realized that, I definitely had to put my feet to the fire on some more serious issues to get people into the rooms and to be able to get people to have these conversations.
When you got to Teen Vogue, and Teen Vogue had in many ways stood out for its willingness to talk about politics and sort of third rail issues. When you got there, what were the things that you really wanted to bring to the fore? And I think a lot of people wonder, you've been able to bring these things to the table, to put certain people on the cover. So it seems like the lack of that in other parts of the company is not for an unwillingness of the company to let that happen. It's the lack of the will of perhaps other editors to champion it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody runs a different magazine, and I for sure, I mean, everybody has different experience and life experience on how they choose those different people. I always felt really strongly that, especially when I assisted at Teen Vogue, I felt like, our young Hollywood package was like all white straight couples, and there were no queer couples. There was nobody, mixed. There was nobody that wasn't a straight white person. And I always felt like, you know what, one day if I come back and I'm able to make changes, like, this is something that I'm going to change. I think that a lot of it for me hasn't been, it's not about like canceling anything for me. It's about like holding people accountable, and it's about making changes that are really productive and positive, because I love this industry. I love my job. And I think that it is possible for you to build upon, some failures of other people and make it into a good thing.
One of the things that you had been quoted as saying in the past is that if you had a daughter, you weren't really sure if you'd want her to work in this industry. Do you still feel that way, or do you feel like you have cleared a path that would make you more comfortable with having a daughter work in the industry?
I still feel that way. I just think that it's not for everyone. I think that I say this to young Black girls all the time who email me and are like, I think I want to do this. It's just not for everyone. And I don't mean that in a way of, that you can't do it. I just think that it is such an emotional roller coaster to be one of the only Black people doing anything. And specifically in the fashion space, it hasn't fully opened up to us. I think it's opened up to us in certain spaces and certain levels that are on the surface, but I don't think that that door is fully yet open.
Yeah. And Kerby, I guess I would sort of put the same question to you. If you had a son who was creative, artistic, would you encourage that son to work in fashion, or would you say, don't do it?
Oh man,
Happy
that's
Father's
loaded.
Day.
Yeah, that's loaded. I know my father didn't want me to work in this industry because he thought he was just like, just stay out of trouble. And that's his best way of saying, like, stay where people love you, and and where people will appreciate you. And I think the work that we're doing, and I think the work that Lindsay's doing, the work that you're doing, the work that all of us, all of the designers, whether they're legacy or brand new, and people who are working behind the scenes, people who are doing their PR, we're all making it so that this space loves us back. and it might not love us in our lifetime, but we're going to leave the door open and make it a better place. So I'm confident in the work that we're doing, knowing that it's going to be a better place for my son or my daughter.
Well, I want to just get to a couple questions that some people have submitted. And the first one is from Mila Lawson. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mila Lawson from Illinois. And her question is, have you always felt safe bucking the status quo in fashion and challenging racism at work? And I think either of you could take on that question.
I can start with that. I mean, the answer is absolutely not. In the beginning, I like, with a passion, I want to say ferociously, hid the fact that I was Black from the public view until I couldn't anymore, which wasn't much long. But, you know, the minute people realized they liked my work and they saw me, then the two things couldn't coexist. And my work couldn't just be what it was. It had to become something else. You know, if I was making $50,000 evening gowns, they would have still called me a streetwear designer. And, you know, I had the foresight to know that that was coming. And, you know, and I knew there were going to be labels that I wasn't going to escape. And I knew there was going to be comparisons that I couldn't escape. And I knew that I was going to be given a shelf life. You know, I remember one of the first desk sides I ever did. And if you guys don't know what desk sides are, it's when your publicist takes a designer to meet an editor, you sit at their desk. That's why they call it a desk side. And you present them your collection. So you bring like a selected, you know, if you have a 40-piece collection, you bring them like 10 pieces or 5 pieces, whatever the case is. And this was my first ever desk side. And I remember rolling these racks down Fifth Avenue to go, you know, I was super excited and nervous. I didn't know this was 2014 or 2013. And the guy was like, listen, I'm not even gonna bother to look at the clothes. He was like, I'm just gonna tell you right now, there's a wave happening with you, with Ben Trill, with Anwar, with public school, and you gotta ride that wave like the Latin explosion, like Mark Anthony and Ricky Martin. You guys have to make that Macarena money. And you know, all of those things, all of those microaggressions and macroaggressions made it very unsafe for me to be myself. And so at first it wasn't easy, but at some point, you know, you start realizing that playing that game is never gonna work. You know, you're gonna be forced to speak a way it's not natural for you. You're gonna be forced to like be a certain way that's not natural for you. And at some point, you got to give up their game and play what's authentically yours. And it might take longer, but it's worth it in the end.
And the last question is from Danielle Quateng from New York. And Danielle, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. What can brands, especially Quateng, especially ones who've profited from Black culture, do to intentionally support the communities of color that they've taken from? I will toss that one to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now there's a lot that brands can do. I think, you know, one of the biggest annoyances that I have right now is seeing all the brands post, you know, an MLK quote, a Mandela quote, or some stock imagery that they found from God knows where, and a Black square, and then, you know, kind of say that they've made a donation, not really say how much or where they've made a donation, and then they're back to posting their usual influencers that are still not really, you know, anything different. And I think what a lot of us are really feeling right now in the industry is that there needs to be a really eager commitment to, you know, making a long system change, that it can't just be popping in and out of this moment, because if not, you know, we're gonna have this problem again in 6 months. And I think that a lot of the brands have to really be invested in making serious changes from, their boardrooms, but also, making sure there's a pipeline for younger talent to be promoted. I think that it's, a serious effort in, changing influencer networks. And I saw some brands still the other day posting, campaigns that had zero diversity. It's just unacceptable. And I think that it's a holistic point of view that really has to shift for all these brands, and making sure that they're thinking about inclusivity at every turn.
Well, I wish I could talk to you for 2 hours more, but I'm going to have to end it at that. Thank you both so much. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. You can go to WashingtonPostLive.com to register for upcoming conversations. And just a little promo here. This Thursday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi joins the program. And next week, we'll be continuing our Race in America series with Stacey Abrams on Monday, June 29th. Again, I'm Robin Givhan, the fashion critic for the Washington Post, and thank you for joining me on Washington Post Live.